Hello, folks, and welcome back to another episode of the Two Stewards Show. I'm your host, Mark, and I'm here with your other hosts, Brent.
Hello, everybody.
And today we're going to start a little mini-series on ADUs, accessory dwelling units. So we've been talking a little bit about macro and some more abstract rambling concepts the last few episodes. But now we've got some very specific stuff where we want to talk about.
Very relevant to what's going on in our city here
Yes.
in Hamilton and probably around multiple different provinces.
Yeah, absolutely, in Canada for sure. As regards the housing crisis. So you actually had somebody email in, and maybe I'll just kind of summarize the question here, because this is a good step-off point to the discussion about ADUs, right? So this person bought a 3-bedroom bungalow. They're going to put a 2-bedroom apartment in the basement. Yep, I mean, that's pretty common. So you're making it into a duplex. Now, they were wondering, is it worth adding a third detached ADU, accessory dwelling unit, in the backyard? And I mean, if you ask us, we're always like, yes, more density. But there's a few questions, right? So does this lower the quality of tenant attracted to the property? Does it make the property weird and hard to sell someday because you might have a neighborhood full of bungalows and then you got this thing with like 3 units on it?
Yeah.
And then, what do? Do you like match the neighborhood? Do you do a modern look? And then how do you rent it out? Like as a long-term rental, as a short-term rental, what's the best option? So I think we'll use that as sort of a kickoff point to talk about ADUs. And this is really Brent's wheelhouse here. So I'll be asking the questions here, Brent.
Great.
So
I had a coffee this morning.
Okay, so. We're good. We're good to go. So, okay, is it worth adding an ADU in the backyard?
No. Yes. So that's a great question. It depends. So first of all, okay, what's an ADU? You said accessory dwelling unit. We just jump into this a little bit more. So every municipality has their own kind of words for this, like second suite, detached, accessory dwelling, and whatever it is.
Yeah.
Essentially, you're building a legal dwelling unit on the same lot as your principal dwelling, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a residential zoned house, residential zoned lot in the city, and the bylaws permit, like your zoning bylaw permits a third dwelling unit.
Which, jump in here, but
Yeah.
we talked about as of right zoning and what's happening in Ontario.
Yeah.
So would I be right in saying that you can do this pretty well anywhere in Ontario now?
Yeah, so I don't know anywhere, but most places, yes. Basements for sure, backyards. I think some cities are more ahead of the curve than others. But
okay, I thought that Ford had put it out saying basically like you have to allow this now in your city.
Well, that's the thing. So you have to allow it, but then how do you allow it, and how progressive are you in making all the requirements known to investors or people who want to put these in your backyard, right? So some cities are like, we were ready to have these in everybody's backyard.
Like
this
Hamilton.
is what you do, right? Whereas other cities are like, kind of tentative. We don't really want to have these, whatever, and they make it a little bit harder. So they kind of kick themselves in the foot a little bit, and that's where you get into NIMBYism and IMBYism.
Yeah. But I mean, basically, when we talked of as of right, that means you still have to get permits and stuff, but you don't have to get a variance. You don't have to do like a public hearing.
Yeah.
As long as you get the permits and you're good, then, and whatever other red tape the city kind of throws at you, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're talking about Hamilton now as our example, but this, could be applied elsewhere.
So as of right, so if you have the a zoning that allows for a detached accessory dwelling, you can do that as of right, which basically just means, just to refresh people's memory, that you're permitted to do it, but you still have to meet the setback requirements, the height requirements, and the lot coverage requirements. Like there's a bunch of requirements that, as long as you fit within those, you don't have to go to a public consultation and pay all those fees and wait, because it is a public process, so it takes time, right?
Yeah.
So you can just basically, if you meet all the requirements, submit for a building permit, get your permit, and the neighbors don't really have to get notified. Nobody has an opinion on whether or not this is going to be permitted. So yeah, if you go back 5-10 years, you would never think of this, right?
No.
But because there's such a crisis for housing and affordability crunch for people, the city is recognizing, okay, we need to do something. We can't really build out, because in this area we have the green belt.
I think Doug Ford tried that, didn't he?
Yeah.
That didn't go so well.
Well, he's like, look at all this green land. Why don't we just develop it? And it's like, nee. Yeah, that's a political thing, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's a really tough issue. A lot of people want to push back on that. But on the other hand, if you want to have more housing, you got to put it somewhere. So this is kind of an easy way to say, well, we have all this land in people's backyards. Why don't we just let individual homeowners, maybe some investors, start building dwelling units in the backyard? And there's kind of more of a trend towards people not having a car, at least in some areas. Maybe out in the suburbs, you still kind of need a car, but a lot of areas, you could make do with working from home, and you can get on the bus and go to your grocery store, and you don't really need a car. A lot of the younger generation probably can't even afford a car.
Well, I'm thinking of a lot of new immigrants as well, right?
Exactly, yeah.
They're not coming here with loads of money, and certainly not a car.
Yeah. If they need one, they rent one. And
yeah.
So what that does, I guess, just puts a little bit less pressure on the requirement for parking, right? So if the city's saying, well, you probably can't fit a backyard dwelling unit because you can't, not because you don't have the space in your backyard, but because you can't accommodate a parking spot.
Yeah.
Right. So now they're starting to show more leniency on that. And, you only need 2 parking spots for 3 dwelling units, for example.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay. So, is it worth, I don't know if you answered this yet. Is it worth adding an ADU in the backyard if you had, we're probably thinking of like an investor now who, it could be someone who owns a home as well, like a homeowner who lives there. What's the best way to do densification? Do you start with add your basement suite and then do an ADU, do them both at the same time? If you have the money, can you do more than one ADU?
Yeah, if you have the money is the question, I think. And to what standard, right? Because you can convert a basement if it already has, let's say, a kitchen and a bathroom, and you can kind of just do the bare minimum to meet your codes.
Yeah.
So fire rating, sound, some of the stuff could probably get grandfathered in if you already have drywall. Like there's a chance the city might say, okay, well, yeah, you just put another layer on here, and like we've had stuff like that approved in the past. So you could probably do a basement apartment pretty cheap, but if you're going and you're basically, taking the stairs out of your house, which is what we've done on multiple occasions, right? Where you live upstairs, but the stairwell goes to the basement, but you don't really use that because you blocked it off. But that takes up a lot of square footage in the basement as well. So if you put a walkout in, like a concrete cutout, and you put steps out the outside, then all of a sudden you can eliminate all the square footage in the basement and have maybe another bedroom, right?
Yeah.
Go from a 2-bedroom unit to a 3-bedroom unit.
Okay, yeah.
And you can charge more rent, but now your house is not really ever going to be a single family dwelling again, right? So if you live there and you're doing this in your basement, it's always going to be a rental unit.
Yeah, so if your family grows, you're going to have to probably move or rent the basement out to your kids.
Yeah. So I guess it depends on how much you're looking to spend and what your intention is, right? Because if you go that extra step and it becomes an investment property rather than your primary dwelling or your principal dwelling, and it might make more sense for you to move at some point, keep this as an investment property. And that's something that we kind of help people do as well, right? If they're living in a house that's suitable to be an investment property, right? Like it meets all the criteria that, this property that you own, you're currently living as a single family home. You could add 3, or you could make it into 3 units and refinance it and take the money back out and go buy your own house, right?
Yeah.
Somewhere else. So that's a cool little strategy. But anyways, we're talking about ADUs.
Yeah, well, it's all
Is
part
is
of it.
it
I want to
worth
get back
it?
to that refi part as well, but yeah, okay. So the basement you can do relatively easily,
Yeah.
unless you're doing major structural changes, which you might want to do. But then you're probably vacating the first floor as well, right?
Yeah.
If you're taking out stairs and
If you're taking out stairs, if you like, concrete dust is the worst.
yeah,
But structural changes, right? If you're putting in a beam or something,
yeah,
there's ways to do it without interrupting. But HVAC system is a big one, right? If you want to move the furnace and change the ductwork in a
Right.
significant way in the basement, that's going to affect. So obviously, like you might be able to do it during the summer, but you have to kind of work that out.
yeah. Okay, okay, and then so adding the ADU to the backyard. So
I've
Is
lived
it-
through enough renos that
you and me both, pal. Adding an ADU to the backyard, isn't it cheaper just to go buy another property?
cheaper. So if you already own the land and it meets the criteria and you can put a backyard suite back there without going through some drastic, public process, then it's not really cheaper, right? Because you already have the land. So essentially you're sitting on free land. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. Probably a lot of homeowners don't want to just plunk another house in their backyard and, that's where my kids play.
Yeah,
But if you look at it like I was just describing before, where your house could be an investment property at some point,
Yeah.
right? Because actually a lot of people in my age bracket who are like, in their 30s, they bought their starter home and now they're getting to a point where, you know what, we're kind of outgrowing this. We need something else, and they're moving.
yeah,
But they're selling a house that it's a great rental property, to be honest. It's a bungalow. It meets the criteria for an upstairs downstairs conversion, and they have enough space in the backyard for an ADU. So in that situation, buying another house as an investment property and staying here might not make sense, right? It might make sense
Yeah.
to keep this one, turn it into an investment property, and move. Right?
yeah. So would it be cheaper to do that than to buy another property?
Yeah, because you're not paying for the land again, right? So if you're sacrificing your backyard, but you're gaining, another stream of income.
Yeah.
So for somebody who's doing this on their land, they're going to get, could be 2,000, 3,000. I don't know. Depends on what you build. The stuff you can build in Hamilton. So we've done a few designs, and we actually just got a permit a couple weeks ago or a week ago. But you can build a 750 square foot house with a basement and a story and a half, like in your backyard as of right. So we have one property that we're investigating right now. Like we own the property, we're converting the house, but the backyard is ginormous, which is the reason we bought the
Is that
property.
the official term, ginormous?
Ginormous, yeah.
Okay.
It says right in the zoning. As of right, you can do whatever you like in this ginormous yard. But what would qualify for an ADU? So I think this would boggle people's minds, because when you say like a tiny home or a detached, like a garden
Yeah.
suite, people think, okay, just this little thing with, one bathroom and a bedroom and maybe a little cooking area. And,
Yeah, it's like a hippie living in there.
yeah.
They don't shower too often, so it's
Yeah.
okay.
You got two little chairs out the front. And, yeah.
Yeah.
But this, you can have a full basement,
Yep.
and it's like a 700 and something square footprint, right? And then it's story and a half. So you have like your common area on the main floor, and maybe you have a little office.
Yeah.
And then you have 2 bedrooms upstairs with like slanted ceilings, and then maybe a bathroom in between, right?
So I'm thinking of a lot of houses like on the west, insert your number here, west first to west, whatever.
In Hamilton.
In Hamilton, where like that is wartime homes.
Those
right?
are
Or
the houses,
Stelco
yeah.
worker homes. That's that house.
Yeah.
But just new.
Maybe just a little bit smaller, because the square footage, like above grade square footage, is kind of capped at a certain
Yeah.
percentage of what the main house is. Right. So you can only go up to, I think it's 70% of what the floor area of the house is.
Right.
So if you have a bigger main house,
Yeah, you
like
can do
more
a
square
bigger
footage, you can
ADU.
go up to a certain size, right?
Yeah.
And then they also limit the number of bedrooms. But, you know, if people show an office, like happens all the time, right? You want an office, not a bedroom, doesn't have a closet, but it's still another room. So when you're doing your rental listing, you all of a sudden basically have a 3-bedroom home, right?
Yeah.
Or 2+1 or something like that, right? But if you build this thing with a basement, you technically could have like a 5-bedroom home
That's crazy.
with 2 bathrooms, or like depending on the number of fixtures you can have,
Yeah.
right, in your backyard.
Yeah. Ridiculous.
So the question, I guess, is what's it going to cost to build that?
Yeah.
And what's that going to rent for? And then the other question that investors want to know is what's that going to be valued at? What is it going to refinance for or appraise for, right? So a lot of these things are kind of unknowns because there's not a whole lot of rental stock out there.
Yeah.
In the neighborhood we're in, there's 2 that I'm aware of that are detached dwellings that are recently in the last year.
Yeah.
And they are basically garage conversions.
Oh, okay.
Right? So that's another way that this is done, is if you have an existing outbuilding, a garage that is structurally sound, you can tie it into the house and turn that into a dwelling unit. And I think that'll be a lot more common moving forward, is if there is a garage, it's converted.
Yeah, I've seen a few of those. And
but then you
add a little bit onto the garage.
Yeah. You save all the construction cost of putting in your foundation and your walls and roof.
Okay,
right?
yeah, because now you're not doing a basement, right? You're just leaving the pad as is.
Yeah.
If it's in good shape, and then building up.
Yeah. But the cost is a lot lower. But then, you know, what can you get for rent for a garage-sized unit? It's still decent, right, for the cost that it is.
Yeah, you could fit a 2-bedroom in there probably. 2-bed, 1-bath.
But when you look at, is it worth it? It's kind of about trade-offs, right? So if it's an investment property, it's probably worth it. But if it's your own house, you have to kind of look at, well, I was using that garage as a man cave. Or, you know, I store my car in that garage. Does anyone store their car in their garage? I don't think so.
I never have.
No.
It's like tools, junk.
Come home, open the garage, and it's just like, oh, yeah, all that stuff I got to deal with.
Okay, so for an investor then, I think what we're getting, you know, the question that we had, is it worth to add an ADU? Yes, so in terms of rent, because now instead of having one bungalow that you can rent for, let's say $3,000, if it's a whole house with a backyard and everything, you could probably rent that top floor for $2,500. You can rent the basement, and we're talking Hamilton here. Basement for another maybe $2,000. If it's all nice, if it's all been redone, and then the thing in the backyard. So let's say it's
another $2,500 depending.
Yeah, so now you're
if it's brand new.
Yeah, $7,000 a month or so income.
Yeah.
Now you have to balance that against your payments and stuff. But you talked about the refinance. So I don't know. Let's just explore that a little bit. So you need some money, obviously, to do the construction.
Yeah.
Can you borrow money?
So maybe let's just walk through. We got to paint a picture what the scenario is. So let's do this as an investor, right? Not a homeowner. So an investor is going to, they want to make an investment in the city to deploy a bunch of money into an asset that they think they want to own for the long term, right? So real estate, perfect thing. They could buy a bungalow and rent it out. That's not going to work, right? Your rent's not going to cover your expenses with the house prices and the interest rates. It's just foolish, right? What has been really common over the last 5 to 8 years is you buy that house, you add the basement suite. Now you have 2 streams of income. That generally works until about 2 years ago when the interest rates, or a year ago when the interest rates tripled. Right? So now your carrying costs and your borrowing costs to convert the house and to carry that is it's just cost prohibitive to just doing 2 units, right? Sometimes you might be able to make it work. Obviously, if you get the house for a good price, or you can do the renovations really cheaply, and you can attract great tenants, right? So you got all these variables, right? You pay the least amount for the house, the least amount for the renovations. You get the best refinance value, and you get the best rental income. Then maybe it works. But It's still really, really challenging right now, right? But with the detached ADU, that adds another income jump, right, on the same lot. So now you're buying the house for the same price, but you're getting, instead of 2 times the income, you're getting 3 times the income, right?
Yeah.
But you do have to obviously build 2 units.
Yeah.
Or like you have to build a basement and build a backyard suite. So running the numbers on that, there's a lot of variables, right? Depending on, if you have to come in and demolish something, right? So some of these houses, it might work, but there's a garage or like a carport attached to the house, and you can't fit the ADU with the right setbacks unless you demolish something. So you have the extra cost, right? Or like there's all kinds of different things that might affect, it's all project specific.
Yeah.
But then what do you choose to build too, right? Do you choose to build a full basement, basically a 5-bedroom home in your backyard?
Yeah.
Or are you gonna just do like a slab on grade, 450, 550 square feet, 1-bedroom unit or a bachelor kind of style? So it's a lot cheaper to construct that, right? With 1 story, just 4 walls, a roof, and a little bathroom and a kitchenette, but obviously your rent would be a lot lower for that.
Yeah.
Because your tenant profile is going to be. You kind of have to work backwards from what your tenant profile is going to be for that particular area, that particular size of unit that you think you can build. Right. So if you look at your lot that you're considering to buy, and the footprint that you can build on is large, well, then obviously your construction costs are going to be more, but your rent's going to be more. So all those numbers you take into consideration, and you can usually put an offer price together that says, okay, well, at this price, it makes sense.
Right.
And it's difficult to make numbers work when interest rates are crazy. Yeah. But like we always talk about, right, it's a long-term investment, and rents are strong. Rents are increasing. There's upward pressure on rents because of the fact that housing is just unaffordable for so many people, and there's so many more people coming. Everyone needs a place to live, so rents seem to be trending upwards.
Yeah.
And people are more and more content with smaller spaces too, right? Because when they could pay $2,000 and have a whole house, that was kind of like, I'm entitled to a whole house, but now they're paying $2,000 and they're getting a 2-bedroom basement unit.
Yeah.
But they're kind of resign themselves to saying, that's all I can afford. It's kind of sad, but
yeah. But if it's nice and new and shiny, I think that takes the sting off quite a bit, right?
Yeah. But compared to what, right? Like if I pay $2,000 and I get a nice, very bright basement unit, or I can live in, a 3-bedroom apartment building unit, right, what would I choose, right? Like, do I want to have a tree in my yard? Do I want to have a real spot for, sitting outside and enjoying like the weather or whatever? Or would I rather live in an apartment building with hundreds of other people and, just throw my garbage in a dumpster and whatever? Like, it's a different lifestyle.
Yeah, and deal with bed bugs and cockroaches.
Yeah, not saying it's not good and it doesn't suit certain people, but it just, I think people are attracted to the lifestyle of living in a mature neighborhood, right?
So can you get quality tenants for an ADU? So is it worth having like a 5-bedroom versus a 3-bedroom? Because is there really that much difference in the rent? Like, I'm thinking my family could fit in a 5-bedroom, theoretically, right? But would I want to? Are you going to actually get people who want 5 bedrooms in an ADU, or is it going to be just do 3 bedrooms and that'll cap out the kind of people that you would be able to rent?
I don't think it's worth it to do 5 bedrooms. I'm just saying, for perspective people, you could technically have that size of a structure.
Yeah. But you're typically going to do 2-3 bedrooms.
Yeah. So that's where you kind of look at the numbers and say, well, the cost to build this. And the biggest thing is the cost to put the foundation in the ground, right?
Yeah.
So like services, right? Running your water and sewer, and those you have to do no matter what you build.
Yeah.
And they're all site specific and kind of unique. But the foundation is really, you could do a slab on grade, so just a concrete engineered slab on top of the ground, and you don't have to excavate and cart dirt around. You still have to do some excavation, and it's engineered, so
Yeah.
there's a little bit more involved than just scraping the dirt away and putting some
Yeah, but you're not
concrete
going 8 feet down and putting.
yeah,
footings,
you're
right?
not going below the frost line.
Yeah.
You're just using insulation to make it work. Piers have been used too, like helical piles or piers. It's kind of there's all different construction techniques that can kind of reduce cost, but either you're going basement or no basement, right?
Yeah.
And if you go basement, then you have the bonus of storage. You might be able to have like a rec room or something, but you also have more room to heat, right?
Right.
So I kind of brought it up as, wow, you can actually do this. But in reality, as an investor, like unless your parents are living there and you want to spend an extra 80 grand putting a basement in,
Yeah.
and then maybe finish it off or something, put carpet in there, like it's probably not worth it as an investor to do that.
Right now, anyways.
Right now, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where I was kind of going. Like, if this is a desirable area to live and they're not making more land and you have an ADU, and you did put a basement in, like in 15 years, right?
Yeah.
That could be just the regular lifestyle, right? And now you have an ADU and you have a basement in it, and people are just like, I'd pay way more rent for an ADU with
And
a
that makes you
basement.
stand out. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are all the things, like this is really a bleeding edge conversation. Bleeding edge, cutting edge.
Yeah. Leading edge.
Yeah,
Bleeding edge.
leading edge, bleeding. Yeah.
I think it's leading edge, and people have just made it into bleeding edge. I've heard it, but anyways, one of those.
What I'm trying to say is that there's not too much data, at least for this area, because, so for example, like if you want to look at comparable homes sold, right? That's usually how you get to a value of your investment property when you're doing, let's say, a basement suite.
Yeah.
You'll look at comparable legal duplexes that have sold, and there's a lot more of those. I mean, they're still not very common, but there is a lot more of those out than legal duplexes with a detached dwelling selling, right? So even in my conversations recently with appraisers, right, they're having a hard time figuring out exactly how they're going to value this, because you know, you can value it based on comparables,
Yep.
but there are no comparables, or you could value it based on the income it generates.
Yeah.
But in reality, there's this, since it's it's a single family home technically with a basement accessory dwelling, like it's still kind of comparable to other single family homes. So it's hard to value just on the cost, or like just on the income approach.
Yeah.
And then there's the kind of cost approach where it's like, well, what did it cost to build this? And that's more of like an industrial commercial kind of style of appraisal. But
Yeah.
there's not really any data to go off of yet, right? So same thing when you're asking me questions about rent. It's kind of unknown whether or not people are going to really, really like these.
Yeah.
But based on my experience, I could just speak from like conversations I've had with tenants about, hey, we're putting this in the backyard. What do you think? Most tenants are comfortable with it. Obviously, if they're not comfortable, they probably wouldn't come. Like if you put it in the listing, they probably won't come to see it.
You're not going
but-
to see them anyway.
Yeah, so maybe the ones I'm talking to are a bit biased. But they realize like it's a brand new unit. It's really nice. I got this kind of space to myself. And that's the biggest thing with the detached dwelling, right? Is I'd be willing to pay more to live above grade, so not in a basement.
Yeah.
And I don't have to share anything with, like the water pressure is not going to be affected by the other tenants necessarily. You know, I don't have to talk to them if the, fuse blows or the breaker trips or whatever, depending on how you wire your units. Stuff like that, right? And then the big one is noise, smell. So with people cooking in the basement,
right,
it's like, you were cooking fish at 11:30 last night, and you were doing it the night before. Like, you don't know how many units we get complaints like that, right? So this guy was cooking last night. It's like, well, he needs to eat.
Doesn't need to eat fermented cabbage though.
Yeah, at 11:30 at night every day. But that is not a factor with these ADUs, right? So for tenants, you have to sacrifice because you might not have the ideal parking spot. You might have to walk quite a ways to get there. But once you're in your unit, it's kind of your space. It's, it's valuable, right?
Yeah, and I think there's less, just in general, less value placed on outside space than there was in the past, right? Because, like, even in my neighborhood, some people are outside, and like usually it's the kids and stuff, and like we're outside all the time. We love it.
Yeah.
But mostly in the neighborhood, you don't see anyone.
No.
Right? Most people are just like, they come home, they go inside, and that's where they stay. They don't go outside.
Close the blinds.
Yeah, maybe mow the lawn or whatever. But it's
That's
like,
the other
why do you
thing.
even
If people
a
have their
lawn?
blinds closed all the time, and I just go like, why do we even build windows?
Right?
That might be a trend. If you're in Windows moving forward, we might not have Windows.
Yeah, maybe.
We only have Windows because it's building code. I don't know. Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, I just think that's less of a factor. Like if you're talking about a backyard ADU
Yeah.
and there's not much of a yard, like who cares?
Yeah.
I'm just playing video games or watching TV anyways, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
For,
exactly.
For your, I guess, and that's where you talk about working backwards and figuring out your ideal tenants.
Yeah.
That's where you got to figure out like who in
What
this
are they gonna
neighborhood is
want?
going to,
Yeah.
what do they want?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, so what I'm getting from you here is that it's probably worth it to
I don't
put
know
in
if I answered
ADU.
a single question yet.
Yeah, you should be a politician. No, but ideally, what you're looking for, if what I'm picking up is right here, is probably like a bungalow type of home, because it's going to be cheaper than like, the bigger homes, but something with like an unfinished basement on a big lot is kind of like an ideal in this area anyways.
Yeah.
Is ideal because you don't have, without a garage or anything or a shed or whatever, so you don't have demolition costs. You're going to have renovation costs, but you're going to have them anyways. And then you have easy access and you can build as big an ADU as you possibly can.
Yeah.
In the back.
Yeah, exactly. And a big lot is like there is a minimum size, right, that would work.
Yeah.
And you can kind of go through the zoning regulations if you want to fall asleep, but
I'll let you do that.
but
If I want to fall asleep, I'll just listen to our podcast.
yeah, at real time speed.
Let's slow it down a little.
But what I was gonna say is like a deep lot is good, but you need an access point, right? So it depends where the house, like where the main house that you're buying is situated on the lot. Right.
So you need like a driveway basically to the, or
Yeah,
at least
you need
a
some
walkway.
access. You need a 1 meter wide, unobstructed pathway, and that's for fire safety, right? So you need to be able to get back there. So you can't just like say, well, you know what? If you kind of creep around this bush and get in there, and then like you can get
do
to your
a tunnel?
I'll ask.
Yeah. Why don't you find out and get back to
I'll
us?
say I'm Mark, and then I'll ask.
And just like that, we're off track.
So the other thing I was going to say is, so a corner lot, for example, or a through lot where it fronts on both streets, or it has an alleyway behind. So there's a lot of different style lots in the city of Hamilton. There's a lot of these alleyway kind of streets or laneway, right, where it's a main street up front, but you do have access at the rear. So in that case, like you can have a lot more density because your house
that's ideal.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. Like, I guess it gives you access to the unit that's kind of private.
Yeah.
But it's doesn't make it necessarily any more cost efficient to build versus building one in your backyard. You're still kind of doing the same construction and whatever else, right? But it's just it definitely those units you can kind of build more dense because the houses are right beside each other. The lots are usually skinnier, right? And you don't have like a parking beside necessarily. And, so.
Okay, so back to our original question, does this make the property weird? And in turn, would it be harder to sell someday?
Yeah, so that's an interesting argument that, or discussion to have, because if it's so zoom back 10 years.
Yeah.
There weren't too many houses with legal basements because it's just very onerous to go through the process. Everybody kind of had another kitchen in their basement and whatever, but
there were plenty of illegal basement apartments.
That's
right?
what I mean. Like they're just like another
that
kitchen.
were rented out.
Yeah. But when you're selling a house, you're generally selling it as, this is a single family home for your family to buy and live in. And by the way, it has a potential to have like a granny suite or whatever,
Yeah.
right? And the listing kind of goes, picture your family living in this property and enjoying the yard with access to a thing so your kids can live in the basement, or a little bit of income to supplement your lifestyle, whatever, right? Whereas fast forward to today, it's like housing crisis, property values are crazy. And in some ways they're justified because now you can put 3 legal units and generate all this income from your property. But a lot of more listings are like, hey, this is a piece of land in Hamilton and you could put 3 units on it, right? So it's no longer being sold to that family who wants to make this their forever home and landscape the backyard really nice. So the clientele that's buying them could be a lot different, right? So you could buy it as a family, live in one of the units and rent the other 2 out, right? Or you're an investor buying it. Or another whole category is, let's say a young person or two young people, let's say 2 couples, right? And they want to co-own a house. And that, like, I'm aware of multiple situations like that, right? Where it's like 2 couples, they can't afford a house on their own, but they can go together and go joint venture on a house. One lives upstairs, one lives downstairs, right? So now if you had a 3rd unit, that property becomes like, 3 couples can do it. So you can afford even more property, right?
Yeah. And I have seen like a lot of ads. Yeah, just you mentioned the tone of the ads.
Yeah.
Shifting from that sort of single family to like, this place has a basement suite ready to go.
Yeah.
So, supplement so it's still targeted at that family.
Yeah.
But it's now supplement or, help pay your mortgage with this basement suite. And that's like a lot more common, right?
Yeah.
And I think people are like, yeah, that's what I need to do.
Well, because in order to qualify for the purchase of the home, if it's, let's say, $800,000, you got to go to the bank and prove to them that you have the income to support, let's say, a $600,000 mortgage, right?
Yeah.
Well, maybe most people's incomes can't do that with these interest rates. But if you have a basement suite adding to your income and a backyard suite adding to your income, now all of a sudden you can afford. When you go to the bank, you say, look, well, I have my income, my wife's income, I have my backyard suite income, and I have my basement suite income. And they might only use 50% of the rental income, but
better than nothing.
I can afford to buy this house because I can afford to carry it with all this income that I'm generating, right?
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden, the same family can afford this bigger purchase because their income's like doubled. Right?
Yeah. Interesting.
So that opens up a whole new market segment, or it expands what might have been a dwindling market segment, right? Of people who couldn't afford it before. Well, now they can because they're getting this other income. But their lifestyle is changing. That's the flip side, right? So they're no longer just living in this wonderful property. They're sharing it.
Yeah, but it's also the difference between owning
a
and renting.
house and renting, or owning in this area versus driving 4 hours and having a commute, right, to where you want to work.
Okay, so getting back to the investor who, so he buys this bungalow, adds a basement suite, adds an accessory dwelling unit in the back, and then you talked about refinancing. So what does that look like? And is it worth it? Do you get all your money back out?
Oh, so I haven't actually done this yet, but we just got the permit to build one. We haven't actually refinanced it, but I can make some assumptions based on conversations I've had with appraisers. And so just quickly, for people who aren't necessarily aware of the investment strategy, because some people definitely are, but maybe some of our listeners, like, what is refinance? Like, why would you
refinance? Yeah.
So just to walk you through how that's relevant is, so when you make an investment, you're going to have, like you buy the house, you get a mortgage, right? When you purchase it, because presumably you don't have $800,000 or $500,000 or whatever you're buying the house for, right? So you get this loan, and then it doesn't have a basement suite and it doesn't have a backyard suite. So now you're going to go and you're going to spend more money. So you spent the down payment, the closing costs, and you spend more money on constructing the basement suite, the backyard suite, maybe one day you build an apartment building in your backyard. So that's all out of pocket, right? Unless you can borrow it from somewhere else. But
Yeah.
you're paying for the down payment, you're paying for the construction costs. So now your investment could be quite sizable, right? So you got to have a lot of cash sitting on the sidelines just to do this investment.
Yeah.
But then when you're done building the units and they're rented out now, you're going to have the original mortgage, which is now relative to the property, it's pretty small, right? Compared to the value of the property.
Yeah.
And you're going to have all this cash that you invested in fixing it up. So what you do is go back to the lender and you say, look, my property I bought for, $650,000 is now worth over $1 million. Can you send an appraiser out and give us a value and loan me 80% of that new value?
Provided that
I can qualify for it.
Yeah, you can qualify, and that they think that you qualify with the income, I guess, from the other units.
Yeah, so that's kind of the limiting factor when you go for a refinance. Is it could be the amount of money that they're going to give you back.
Yep.
Is limited by either the value of the property or the income that you have to support the loan.
And so generally you would want, so you're going to have now a bigger mortgage. So
Yeah.
let's say you got $1 million mortgage now,
Yeah.
but you got to pay for that mortgage.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's not $1 million, maybe it's like 800 grand,
yeah.
because they valued it at $1 million, so 80%. But you still have to, it's not like your payments are the same. Your payments are now increasing, right?
Yeah, significant
So-
increase, but you presumably also have significant increase in the income potential, right? So if you're not living in the house and you're just renting all 3 units out, you're going to have 3 sets of rental income. Obviously you have to run the numbers, but if you do things properly, you should be able to cover the cost of the borrowing for the new mortgage, right?
Yeah. So even if you're...
So just to finish the whole story of this, like you go back and you get a $1 million appraisal, just as an example, right?
Yeah.
You get this new mortgage that's much higher. What that does is it takes all the money that you invested in construction and it puts it back in your pocket,
Yeah.
right? So now instead of, let's say, being out of pocket 500, 600, 700 grand, depending on how much you spent on this thing, you might only be out of pocket like 300 grand, right?
Right.
So now you spent $300,000 and you have 3 units that are generating X number of dollars, and they're basically paying for the debt that cost to buy them and build them.
Yeah. Yeah. So is it possible to get all of your money back out these days?
Not really, no.
No.
Yeah.
But you're going to get a significant amount, which may take you back to like a 20% down payment scenario, right? So where maybe this is $1 million property, now you have 200 grand in it.
Yeah. And so this is the biggest unknown, like provided you can qualify for financing up to whatever $1 million, like, so let's say you have the income to support that and the rental income, like you add all those numbers up and your debt coverage ratios that the bank's going to look at, they're going to say, all right, yeah, no problem, we'll give you the loan. So that's not a limiting factor. The unknown and the kind of other limiting factor right now with the market is the appraisal, because obviously the market is quite strange right now. Like interest rates are crazy. Listings are kind of all over for what they should be doing according to history. But appraisers are generally being cautious. Like appraisers are generally cautious to begin with. Like they're not gonna, if they're appraising a home on behalf of the bank, like usually they say, okay, maybe I always wonder what they do, but they're probably like, well, this could probably sell for that. Let's just take 10% off.
Yeah, exactly.
Usually if you sell your home, it'll sell for more than what it appraises for. Like that. Yeah. In my experience anyways, with the appraisals we've got. But now specifically, like I've even heard like banks telling appraisers, hey, you gotta tone it down a bit, right? Yeah. So you might not get an opinion of value that's where you want it to be, right? So then instead of saying it's worth $1 million and you're like, I spent so much money, it should be worth 1.2, and they might say, oh, it's only worth 950 or something, right? So the loan is going to be dependent on that.
And you can fight that to a certain degree, right?
Yeah, you could get a second appraisal or a different opinion. You could just not take the loan and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are options, and you could you could go private loan and you might be able to get something, but yeah, usually the cost is prohibitive. But all that to say is, from an investor's perspective, you have your money, or you have money back in your pocket. Not all of it. There was a time, and sometimes, depends, right? If you can buy the house for free and you can do the rentals for cheap and you get great rents, you have lots of money, right? Or if you could buy the house and instead of just putting a basement suite in and a backyard suite, you could put, sever the lot and build, a triplex and put another unit. You can all of a sudden have 6 or 8 or 9 or 10 or whatever units, right? Then all of a sudden you're talking, you get a lot bigger money to do the project, but a lot more likely that you're going to get all your money back out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's, okay.
But if you look over the long term, obviously year one is going to be the tough because you bought the house, you did the construction, and you didn't make any income. But year 2, year 3, then you start stabilizing, getting good tenants, getting good rents, paying down some principal on your loan. And then you ride the trends that we've been talking about in this podcast for months now. Population trends, housing supply trends. So they're just not building housing. And the trends towards more density and people being willing to pay more for less, all of these things, right?
And inflationary pressure.
And then
too.
Inflation is a huge one.
Yeah.
So now you own a great spot of the city. You have a nice mature neighborhood. You have a solid house that's all nice, brand new, rents to great people, and it's a really good asset to hold on to long term. There's a lot of reasons why you'd want to own that and hold on to it, right?
Yeah. Presumably it's increasing in value.
Yeah.
For what that's worth in
Yeah.
our system, but that is something, right?
Yeah.
As long if it can keep up with inflation or beat inflation, that is solid. Plus, it's producing income.
Yeah.
And hopefully, a net profit every month.
Yeah, and that's going to depend on what financing you can qualify for, right? Because that property might bring in the same amount of income for you or as the other guy, but if let's say you already have a couple properties, you might not be able to get good financing, or you just don't have the income, you might not be able to pull as much money out. Or and the other thing that's interesting with financing is obviously the more money you invest, the better the cash flow, right? Because you're not paying as much to finance it. So there's kind of a way where you can make the cash flow work. It's just how much money do you want to invest, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because most investors who are more savvy, they want to pull money out to kind of maximize the potential on the next one.
Yeah.
And it comes a point, there's seasons to this too, right? Maybe if you're younger, you might have a higher tolerance for risk because you got more time. So you want to leverage a bit more. But as you get older and you need a little bit more stability, you want more income, you might just want to leave, pay it down, right? Just pay it down to zero, let the tenants pay, your lifestyle, and then you have some equity there. There's different strategies for different people and what their goals are, and there's different risks too, but it's a great asset to hold on to long term.
Yeah. And you also have the option of doing different rental styles too, right?
Yeah.
Maybe and if you're not sure, you could do a long-term rent in the front house and do a short-term rental in the back, right?
Yeah. And I think that's a good conversation to have about specific to people who are homeowners, right? Who are living in the house. It could be a great strategy to look at Airbnbs. Maybe we could talk to Mark. Hey, you're right here.
Hey, here I am.
Every time I think Airbnb, I think Mark now.
Perfect. Job done.
We were trying to go on a vacation and book an Airbnb. I was like, maybe I should just call Mark to book it. But I don't know if you have any Airbnbs in the mountains of.
Not yet. Working on it. So but that's another, and that's another variable as well, right? In terms of cash flow, what rental style are you doing? So.
Yeah. We focus on long-term rentals in our portfolio. Airbnb. So it depends where your city is, right? We could probably talk about this for a long time. So maybe we do that next episode.
Well, I mean, we've done Airbnb to death, but yeah.
But what I'm saying is, so for the tenants who are in the main house, if you had, let's say, the backyard suite and it was Airbnb, you're going to have frequent change of tenants.
Yeah.
There's always, so I find with tenants, there's always kind of this learning curve. The first couple months, like they're figuring out, where do I park? How do I interact with this other tenant? Where do we put the garbage? Who takes it out? Who brings the bins in?
Yeah.
Right? Like if I have to cut the grass, but like who takes care of this? And so it's a little bit of a dynamic to get the property kind of smooth and operating well, and the tenants and if you have tenants turnover every year, like some of our properties will have really frequent, like 1 to 1.5 years they turn over, right? For some reason, that's just the way it worked out. But you usually find you're managing them more because you're always kind of helping them get along for the first little bit.
Acclimatize,
Yeah. So with Airbnb, like I haven't done this with 3 units, but I suspect that like you have to have a tenant who is comfortable with having someone new there, even if it's like a midterm rental there for like 1 month to 6 months or something. Like you're still going to have a more frequent, like get to know your neighbors. It's unsettling. Like maybe we just had our neighbors sell their house, right? And whenever you have that, you kind of have your neighborhood figured out, the kids, whatever, everyone's quirks. And then someone sells and they're right beside you and you're like, who is this going to be, right? How are they going to affect? And, it just, you kind of have a little bit of uncertainty for a while, right? Even in your home. And it's just unfounded. But for tenants, that could be a big thing. I could see, right?
Yeah. That's to think about.
So, but in our portfolio, like we try to do high quality, like high priced rentals. So those tenants also have a certain expectation, right?
Yeah.
Like they don't want
people in and out all the time.
About Airbnb, yeah. So,
all right, we can get into that more later. So, I think that's a good primer on ADUs, and maybe the next couple episodes we'll get into some of the nitty gritty as to how you actually do this. I think we've established like this is a good idea if you can do this.
Yeah.
And the more density you can get as an investor, the better. But doing the sort of 3 units on the one property, you can do as of right. You just got to get the permits and make sure you do it properly. So there's a lot less red tape and a lot less time for the whole process. And time is money because once you bought that property, you're making payments on it. So, doing a 6-month process versus a 2-year process, it's it's a huge difference.
Yeah.
So we'll probably focus on the ADU stuff in the next few episodes.
Awesome. Yeah. Hopefully people learn something on this, and I learned a couple things. So.
Well, I didn't, but just kidding. Okay. Well, thank you for listening, folks. Until next time,
steward your wealth wisely. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Two Stewards Show. If you like my voice better, click subscribe.
And if you like my voice better, click share.
If you like both, give us a 5-star rating.
To interact with the show, feel free to reach out at hello@twostewards.ca.
We'll see you in the next episode. In the meantime, steward your wealth wisely.